Chapter 1. Prologue. Early winter of 1787, East Wing of the Palace of Versailles. Joseph sat in a room adorned with Rococo-style golden patterns and large oil paintings, shaking his head with a bitter smile at the exam paper in front of him. The candle flames of a luxurious 2-meter diameter crystal chandelier flickered, illuminating his fair skin and his delicate youthful features, making him look as handsome as Paris from an oil painting. Beside him, an elderly man with a white curly wig and a lace cravat sighed. Disappointment flashed in his brown eyes as he bowed to Joseph and said, "Your Royal Highness, if you find this difficult, perhaps we can start with the basic courses first." Joseph was momentarily stunned, then snapped out of his reverie. He politely nodded to the old man. "Mr. Lagrange, I think you might have misunderstood. I mean to take the graduation exam for your course, not the entrance exam." That's right. This unassuming little old man was the founder of analytical mechanics, a pioneer of group theory, and a famous French mathematician and physicist hailed as the Prince of Mathematics, Lagrange. Graduation exam? Lagrange frowned, looking at the 13-year-old boy in front of him. "Your Highness, I teach university-level courses. I'm afraid you—" The other noble youths in the room, dressed in luxurious clothes and working on their papers, immediately turned to look, their eyes filled with curiosity. At this moment, a boy of about 16, with a silk jacket with a lace collar and slightly slanted eyes, showed a look of disdain. He said in a loud voice, "Your Royal Highness, I recall you still have 2 years to finish the basic courses." He then nodded to the old man. "Mr. Lagrange often says that the ladder of mathematics must be climbed one step at a time, and being over-ambitious will only lead to a painful fall. I think your Royal Highness should remember this maxim." Joseph ignored him and said earnestly to Lagrange, "Sir, I have self-studied the university-level mathematics courses. I truly need to take the graduation exam." The old mathematician sighed helplessly, then turned to his assistant and said, "André, please fetch the exam paper from the very bottom of my folder." "Yes, Professor," the assistant replied. Soon, several exam papers were laid out in front of Joseph. He quickly scanned them and found that the difficulty had increased several times compared to the previous one, but most of it was still at the level of high school in his previous life, with a small amount of calculus. It was truly not difficult for him. Yes, a little over half a month ago, he was a second-year graduate student at Tsinghua University in the 21st century. That day, he went to France with his supervisor for a wind power generator project. He accidentally fell from the top of a tower and woke up to find himself transmigrated as Louis Joseph, the eldest son of King Louis XVI of France. Perhaps due to the transmigration, Joseph was born a few years earlier than in history and was now 13 years old. Under Lagrange's scrutinizing gaze, Joseph quickly wrote down the answer to the first question, but his mind was racing with the historical trajectory of France. The French Revolution would break out next year, and the entire royal family would be beheaded. As the crown prince, he certainly couldn't escape. King Louis XVI was useless at anything except tinkering with locks. France owed more than $2 billion in foreign debt, while its annual income was only $500 million. Due to the financial collapse, government employees' salaries were in arrears, government operations were struggling, foreign trade had stagnated, and the colonies were increasingly rotten. To supplement the treasury, the cabinet had no choice but to raise taxes significantly. The common people were practically bled dry, while the nobles with tax exemptions spent money lavishly and lived lives of debauchery. Additionally, a severe hailstorm would strike France the following summer. Combined with the droughts of previous years, it would cause a nationwide Great Famine. This would be followed by famished mobs rioting, storming the Bastille, and launching the Great Revolution Expansion Pack. The country would be in turmoil, and tens of thousands would go to the guillotine. So, to save his own head, he counted on his fingers. First, he had to solve France's financial deficit. Second, he had to secure enough grain to prevent people from starving to death. Third, he had to deal with the disloyal nobles. And finally, he had to confront the covetous British and Prussians. The famine would start in July, leaving him with only a little over half a year. He rubbed his forehead in frustration. Because of his young age, he couldn't get involved in state affairs, and he had no outlet for his energy. This was a hellish start, with very little chance of survival. Not far away, the boy with the slanted eyes saw his actions and assumed he was worried because he couldn't do the questions. He immediately scoffed. This idiot! He had the audacity to say he knew university-level courses. How embarrassing! Why is a simpleton like him the crown prince, and not me? Joseph continued to think about how to save his life while quickly writing down the answers. Soon, he finished the first page of the exam. He impatiently flipped the page because once he passed this course with Lagrange, he would have completed his studies at the University of Paris. A little over half a month ago, he had proposed to Queen Marie, his cheap mother, that he wanted to participate in politics to turn his due situation around. But she had briskly refused, telling him to focus on his studies and get back to her once he had achieved something. So he had made a deal with the Queen that he would officially enter politics after completing the courses at the University of Paris. Of course, with his knowledge, he was a true academic powerhouse in this era. In the past half-month, he had already passed most of his subjects. This was partly because he had to spend time remembering the incorrect knowledge. Much of what was held as truth in this era was actually erroneous. Lagrange watched as the Crown Prince's pen flew across the paper. He had long since stopped paying attention to the other students, and his eyes grew wider and wider. These were questions that would take 5 years to complete at the University of Paris, yet the Crown Prince was answering them effortlessly, with clear logic and not a single mistake. He was only 13, and he had self-studied. A shockwave ran through Lagrange's mind. Could another Leibniz have been born? Lagrange suddenly glanced at his assistant, his eyes narrowing slightly. He wondered if André had leaked the questions to the Crown Prince. After all, the Crown Prince's performance was too bizarre. A genius like Leibniz only started university at 14. He immediately took out a pen and paper, scribbled a few lines, and handed it to Joseph. "Your Highness, you don't need to do the rest. Just complete these few questions, and I will consider you to have passed." The boy with the slanted eyes saw this and sneered to himself. "Ha! Is Lagrange going easy on him because he can't do it? What a sycophantic fool! I'll have to find a way to let everyone see the Crown Prince's paper and make him look foolish." Joseph looked at the paper in surprise. There were only 5 questions. The difficulty hadn't changed, but the number of questions had decreased. This was good. He quickly finished the first 2 questions. The third was, "Please write down the proof for Rolle's theorem." He was very familiar with this, and, without hesitation, wrote in the blank space, "Rolle's theorem. If a function f is continuous on the closed interval ab and differentiable on the open interval ab, and if f of a equals f of b, then there exists at least one point c in the open interval ab such that the derivative of the function at that point is 0. Proof. Since the function f of x is continuous in a, b, it must have a maximum value, m, and a minimum value, m, in the closed interval. Joseph finished writing in just a few strokes, but suddenly felt Lagrange's breathing quicken beside him. He looked up and saw the old mathematician's face filled with excitement, staring at the paper as if he had seen his first love. Joseph immediately looked down at the questions again, a bit hesitant. I shouldn't have made a mistake, right? Lagrange grabbed the paper, carefully read the proof several times, and muttered, "It also holds true for differentiable functions. How did I not think of that?" He looked at Joseph again, his gaze as fiery as a flame. "Your Highness, how did you come up with that?" Isn't it just—" Joseph suddenly remembered that Rolle had only proven that between two adjacent real roots of a polynomial equation, there was at least one root. It wasn't until the 19th century that someone generalized it to the category of differentiable functions. "I was careless. I didn't dodge." He quickly took the paper back and changed the subject. "Mr. Lagrange, I need to do the last two questions." End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Son of Divine Favor. "No need to do any more," Lagrange exclaimed, gripping Joseph's shoulder tightly. "This brand new deduction is enough to prove your ability. I will return to the university today to apply for your academic certification documents." "Thank you very much," Joseph was overjoyed. He broke free from the old mathematician's hands, bowed to him, and then rushed out the door. Lagrange had originally wanted to give a speech, but found that the person had already run off. He was stunned for a moment, then hurriedly chased after him, calling out, "How did your Highness think of applying it to differentiable functions? Please tell me your reasoning." The boys in the classroom exchanged bewildered glances. After a while, someone hesitantly asked, "Can anyone tell me, did the Crown Prince just graduate?" "It seems so." "But he only came today." The slanted-eyed boy stared at Joseph's retreating back and muttered angrily, "No, he must have cheated." André subtly rolled his eyes at him and placed Lagrange's questions in front of him. The questions were made up by the professor on the spot, and His Highness's proof is a brand new mathematical discovery. If the Duke of Chartres believes cheating can accomplish this, perhaps he can try it himself. The Duke of Chartres stared at the formulas he couldn't understand at all, as if struck by lightning. He had always considered himself the most brilliant among the young generation of the royal family, but now he couldn't even understand a proof someone else had written. Could it be that Joseph's previous incompetence was all an act, just to make him look foolish? He clenched his fists tightly. "Joseph, you wait. Sooner or later, I will make you prostrate yourself at my feet." Joseph naturally couldn't hear their conversation, but even if he did, he wouldn't care. It was just children bickering. His mind was now completely focused on finally being able to participate in politics and how to rectify France to avoid the outbreak of the Great Revolution and the loss of his head. Lagrange caught up, panting, and pestered him with questions for a while. Suddenly, he felt he had grasped something from the Crown Prince's proof and muttered to himself, "What if f of A is not equal to f of B?" He mumbled it a few times, then his expression turned serious. He hastily bid farewell to Joseph and returned directly to his university office. Joseph watched him walk away and whispered, "If FA doesn't equal f of B, then that would be your mean value theorem. I wish you good luck in proving it a few years earlier." Once the old mathematician's figure disappeared, he waved to his attendant who had been following behind him. "Aymard, where is Her Majesty the Queen now?" The tall, blonde young man quickly bowed and said, "Your Highness, Her Majesty the Queen is in her tea room." Joseph nodded to him, then turned and ran towards the end of the wide corridor. The strenuous exercise caused him to cough a few times. He then remembered that his pneumonia had not yet healed. The original owner's physique was very weak, and this pneumonia had persisted for over a month with no signs of recovery. He waved to Aymard, who had come closer, indicating he was fine. After winding his way for another 100 meters or so, he finally saw the door to the Queen's tea room. From today onwards, he could finally show his abilities and begin to save himself. He took a deep breath, pushed the door open between the guards on either side, and strode in. In the warm and elegantly decorated tea room, Queen Marie, with a complex 2-foot-high coiffure, fair skin, and beautiful light blue eyes, was reclining in an Oriental-style armchair. She held a document in one hand and a cup of black tea in the other, listening carefully to a minister beside her. It seemed she was handling state affairs. Louis XVI spent all his time in his lock-making workshop, so most of the time the Queen managed the government. Joseph sighed inwardly. Louis XVI was actually a rare benevolent monarch in French history, but he inherited a France riddled with problems. Coupled with his lack of governing skills and his obsession with lock-making, he ultimately caused widespread suffering among the people, leading to the outbreak of the Great Revolution. In a time of peace, Louis XVI would likely have been a beloved good king. Joseph actually had a good impression of him, and if possible, he would very much like to save his life. A court official's voice announced from the side, "The Crown Prince has arrived." According to court etiquette, Joseph stepped back half a pace with his right foot facing Queen Marie, bowed with his hand on his chest, and then returned greetings to the ministers in the room one by one. Only then did he excitedly step forward and say to the Queen, "Mother, I have passed the university mathematics graduation exam." A glint of surprise flashed in Queen Marie's eyes. She put down her documents, joyfully clasped his hand. "Joseph, you truly are the pride of your father and me." She had previously sent people to verify the Crown Prince's coursework and confirmed that, besides mathematics, he had passed all other subjects with excellent grades. This meant he had now completed his courses at the University of Paris. She looked at her son with a complex expression. "Why did you secretly self-study without telling your father and me? I mean, you could have studied with renowned tutors." To explain his sudden transformation into an academic genius, Joseph could only make up an excuse that he had been secretly self-studying for many years. "Because," Joseph said, forcing himself to continue, "I wanted to give you a surprise." "This surprise is wonderful!" The Queen picked up a strawberry pudding and put it in his mouth, then affectionately stroked his slightly curly hair. "How did your little head manage to fit so much knowledge?" Beside them, a tall, thin man in a tight-fitting, ink-blue patterned cravat with a sapphire-studded collar and cold eyes frowned and quietly asked the minister next to him, "Bishop Brienne, did the Crown Prince just say he completed university mathematics?" The latter nodded. "It seems so." "How is that possible?" "I am also very shocked." Behind them, the Queen's trusted secretary quietly added, "Not just mathematics, Your Highness, has completed over a dozen courses at the University of Paris, including physics, chemistry, mathematics, geometry, English, and more." Several ministers around them widened their eyes in astonishment. "How is this possible?" "I remember, the Crown Prince is only 13, isn't he?" "It's simply unbelievable." "Indeed," the secretary sighed. "All the teachers who have taught His Highness call him the son of divine favor." "The son of divine favor? With such a talented Crown Prince, France will surely be even more glorious." "Truly, heaven bless France." Joseph ignored the minister's flattery. He pulled away from the Queen's hand and eagerly said to her, "Your Majesty, as per our agreement, may I participate in politics now?" Queen Marie nodded affectionately. "Indeed, my genius son. Oh, by the way, I suggest you go to the Paris City Hall first to gain some experience." Joseph frowned. He wanted to reform France, to fundamentally prevent enraged citizens from slaughtering the entire royal family. What could he do at City Hall? Manage urban traffic or wastewater treatment? He had watched many documentaries about the French Revolution and knew deeply that France's most critical problem was currently financial. Issues like corrupt administration, inability to provide disaster relief, and rebellious nobles were all triggered by the financial collapse. Therefore, to reform France, he must first rectify its finances. Joseph looked at the Queen and tentatively suggested, "I think perhaps the Minister of Finance would be more suitable for me." Queen Marie smiled kindly at his words. France's financial problems were a chronic illness. Since Louis XVI ascended the throne, almost all the energy of the court and government had been focused on solving the financial crisis, but they had always been at a loss. How could a 13-year-old boy, even a son of divine favor, bear such a heavy responsibility? She put away her smile, thought for a moment, and said, "Joseph, if you're interested in finance, you can start at the Paris Tax Bureau." Joseph knew she didn't trust his abilities, but this was normal, given that his body was only 13 years old. He could only settle for second best. "Then let me be the assistant to the Minister of Finance." At this time, an assistant was essentially the Vice Minister of Finance, the second in command in financial matters. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Heading to Paris. This time, before the Queen could speak, the tall, thin man with the cold eyes suddenly cleared his throat, stepped half a pace forward, and said, "Your Majesty, you seem to mention that you intend to let the Crown Prince participate in politics?" Queen Marie turned her head and said calmly, "Yes, Duke of Orleans, I made an agreement with the Crown Prince that he can participate in state affairs if he completes his university courses." The Duke of Orleans's eyes narrowed. He thought to himself, "The Crown Prince has always seemed so mediocre. Why has he suddenly become so brilliant? Was he pretending all this time? But why? And now that he's suddenly showing his ability, what is he plotting?" No matter what, after all his manipulation over the years, the royal family's prestige had greatly declined, and their position was becoming increasingly unstable. If a genius crown prince suddenly appeared, it would inevitably strengthen the court's and the public's confidence in the royal family. This was very bad for his plans. He had to find a way to restrain him. With that thought, he immediately said in a loud voice, "Your Majesty, the Crown Prince is still young and has no experience in government. I believe it would be more appropriate to choose a senior minister to teach him about governance for a few years before he participates in state affairs." Queen Marie frowned slightly. The Duke of Orleans had a point. Although the Crown Prince was astonishingly talented, he was only 13 years old. If he messed up in state affairs, it would have a negative impact on his reputation. She looked at her son and said in a negotiating tone, "Joseph, perhaps you could study for a while longer." Joseph glanced at the Duke of Orleans. As a transmigrator, he knew exactly who this person was, Louis Philippe, a close relative of Louis XVI. At this moment, everyone thought he was loyal to the king and the country, but in reality, he and his family had always been working to topple the king's line and seize the throne for themselves. Historically, after the French Revolution succeeded, when the Girondins voted on whether to execute the king, the Duke of Orleans voted yes without hesitation. This vote ultimately sentenced Louis XVI to death by a margin of 301 to 300. It could be said that his crucial vote sent Louis XVI to the guillotine. Joseph was surprised that he was so eager to jump in. He did not back down at all and said, "Your Majesty, Joan of Arc was the same age as me when she defeated the English army 300 years ago. She proved herself with her actions. Please believe in my ability and give me a chance to prove myself." Orléans said in a heartfelt tone, "Your Highness, state affairs are of great importance. Confidence alone is not enough to—" Joseph was not in the mood for him. He waved his hand decisively. "Duke of Orléans, this is an agreement between me and Her Majesty. Please do not interfere." He then looked at the Queen. "Mother, if I am the assistant to the Minister of Finance, can't I also learn from Bishop Brienne?" The few cabinet ministers were stunned. They hadn't expected the young crown prince to have the courage to openly defy the Duke of Orléans. After all, even the chief minister usually had to consult with the Duke. The Duke of Orléans was even more shocked that Joseph was so dismissive of him. It took him a moment to react. He then said in a flustered, angry voice, "Finance is the lifeline of France. It absolutely cannot be handled by an inexperienced young man." Many ministers around him nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Queen Marie looked at the determined crown prince and finally reached a compromise. "Joseph, you will first serve at the city hall. If you perform well, we will then discuss letting you handle financial matters." Joseph scanned the 7 or 8 cabinet ministers in the room. He knew that with them present, it would be difficult for the Queen to give him the green light. It seemed he could only spend some time at City Hall for now. He nodded and said, "Yes, Your Majesty." The Duke of Orléans still wanted to cause trouble. He stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, the Crown Prince should first learn." "The decision is made." Queen Marie raised her hand to interrupt him and looked at Brienne. "Please continue with the tax reform discussion." Joseph sat to the side and listened to the cabinet meeting. He gained a deeper understanding of France's terrible financial situation. 90% of the meeting was about money, or more accurately, the lack of it. After the meeting, the Queen insisted on rewarding him and made him try a large number of desserts with her. He finally regained his freedom only after his throat started to hurt from the overwhelming sweetness of the various exquisite cakes, puddings, and macarons. Joseph left the tea room, preoccupied with his thoughts. Suddenly, he thought that perhaps he could try to approach Louis XVI. When he arrived at the king's chambers, he was told that Louis XVI was busy with a masterpiece and had been eating and sleeping in his lock-making workshop for 3 consecutive days. Joseph felt a wave of fatigue. With a father like this, what hope is there of avoiding the guillotine? Never mind. Louis XVI, being in the middle of his hobby, would probably just send me back to the Queen anyway. It would be a boomerang effect. He smiled bitterly, shook his head, and instructed Aymard, "Please prepare the carriage. We'll head directly to the Paris City Hall." "Yes, Your Highness." When Joseph left the main gate of the Palace of Versailles, he saw more than a dozen carriages and 60 or 70 people standing respectfully on the side of the marble courtyard. He couldn't help but rub his forehead and shake his head. He recognized most of them. They were the Crown Prince's exclusive retinue, including beauticians, chefs, tailors, and everything else one could need. It seemed they were all prepared to go with him, which explained why so many carriages were ready. Joseph quickly told Aymard to send them all back. What a mess it would be if he brought this group to City Hall. Then he looked at the silver royal carriage parked in front of him. The carriage had an elegant design, with intricate reliefs all over its body and corners decorated with gold threads, making it incredibly luxurious. He thought for a moment, then turned and boarded an ordinary carriage used by the attendants. If he took the royal carriage, he wouldn't get a moment of peace on the way. Soon, 3 gray and black carriages drove out of the Palace of Versailles Square and sped eastward. The Palace of Versailles was located in the western suburbs of Paris, a 3-hour journey from the city center. In the carriage, Joseph let out a bored yawn. He caught sight of a stack of books on the small wooden table in front of him and picked them up to look at them. He found they were documents about the Paris City Hall. He looked at Aymard, who was sitting opposite him. The attendant immediately smiled and bowed, his hand on his chest. It was clear he had prepared these. To be the Crown Prince's steward, his keen insight was far beyond that of an ordinary person. Joseph smiled and nodded to him, then began to read the documents. The contents were very detailed, from the City Hall's organizational structure and functions to its daily operations. As Joseph turned to the 3rd page, he saw that among the departments under the City Hall's jurisdiction, the police department was prominently listed. He quickly read on and confirmed that the Paris police were completely under the jurisdiction of City Hall. His eyes lit up. It seemed that his time at City Hall wouldn't be wasted after all. At the very least, he could thoroughly reorganize the Paris police force. For the common people of France, the lack of public safety was the second worst nightmare after oppressive taxes. Being robbed or stolen from on the streets was a minor matter. Home invasions, murders, and kidnappings were commonplace. Furthermore, the gangs that plundered and oppressed the citizens daily were a major blight on Paris. At that time, no modern police system had been established anywhere in Europe. Public safety relied on neighborhood watch groups for self-protection. Solving crimes was practically unthinkable, and crime was rampant, leaving ordinary citizens living in constant fear. Therefore, reorganizing the police force had great significance. Solving public safety issues could greatly increase social stability, and social stability could, in turn, greatly reduce the public's impulse to behead the royal family. Joseph finished reading the City Hall documents and meticulously thought about the details of reforming the police force. The carriage had already entered the city of Paris, and a suffocating stench of rot immediately wafted in through the windows. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Cracking a Case on a Whim. Joseph casually pulled back the curtain, and his brows immediately furrowed at the sight outside. Since arriving in this world, he had been focused on his exams in the Palace of Versailles. This was his first time seeing the city of Paris. It was completely different from the prosperous European metropolis he had imagined. The buildings were dirty and old, and the streets were full of mud, sewage, and even excrement. This was the source of the foul smell. Dead animal carcasses occasionally floated by in the Seine River, and workshops along the banks discharged wastewater of strange colors, dyeing the river a murky brown. Vendors' stalls were chaotically set up on both sides of the road, making the once spacious streets incredibly crowded. Children happily chased each other, flinging mud. Cursing and shouting for unknown reasons rose and fell. Fights were a common sight, and passers-by were deaf to the screams of those being beaten. There were even robberies happening in broad daylight. It wasn't until Joseph had his guards intervene that the robbers fled into an alley. And this was the Louvre district, which had the best public safety in all of Paris. In short, the entire city lacked the romantic atmosphere of the Enlightenment and showed no sign of the burgeoning dynamism of the Industrial Revolution. The magnificent Palace of Versailles and Paris, though close, felt like two different worlds. The carriage drove past the north bank of the Seine, and the coachman let out a soft "whoa," bringing the carriage to a slow stop. "Your Highness, we have arrived," Aymard bowed, then got out and opened the carriage door for the Crown Prince. Joseph rubbed his rear, which felt almost shattered from the bumpy ride. He walked down the steps his attendant had set up and looked up to see a magnificent building about 100 meters wide in front of him. Its exterior walls were covered with statues, and it was made up of numerous columns and arched floor-to-ceiling windows. It looked like a huge castle presiding over the center of Paris, proclaiming the supreme power of the feudal class. The city hall had already received the news of the crown prince's arrival. Officials of all ranks were gathered in the square outside the main gate, lined up to greet His Highness. But the silver royal carriage they had been eagerly waiting for never appeared. It wasn't until 3 gray and black carriages stopped in front of the City Hall's main entrance and Aimard got out that the head of the Paris Municipal Commission, Lefebvre, twitched his eyelid and hastily called to the people beside him, "Quick, it's His Royal Highness the Crown Prince!" Lefebvre, with his hand on his black tricorn hat, moved his trapezoidal legs, propelling his nearly 200-pound body forward. He led the others and ran to Joseph, greeting him respectfully, "Your Royal Highness." The musicians nearby also reacted and began to play music in a flustered rush. Lefebvre first introduced himself, then pointed to a middle-aged man beside him with gray-blue eyes and cheekbones so sharp they looked as if they would tear through his skin. "Your Highness, please allow me to introduce you. This is Viscount Flesselles, president of the Paris Chamber of Commerce." Upon hearing this, Joseph took a closer look at the man. He had learned from the documents he read earlier that although Lefebvre was the Paris Municipal Commissioner, essentially the mayor, the real number 1 in Paris was this Flesselles. There was no other way around it. The government lacked funds and relied on the Chamber of Commerce to finance its operations. Additionally, the Chamber's connections could solve many problems, so the president of the Chamber of Commerce held an immense amount of power. Flesselles stepped forward again and bowed. "Your Highness, we have prepared a luncheon. We hope you will honor us with your presence." Although Joseph disliked the banquets and balls of this era, the various tedious rituals and rules were a form of torture for him. Social etiquette was unavoidable. He nodded in response. "Thank you all very much." In the spacious and luxurious City Hall banquet hall, servants bustled about. The tables were filled with all kinds of expensive dishes. Cold dishes were immediately replaced with fresh ones. Wine glasses clinked, and laughter filled the air. Joseph dealt with the endless flattery from the officials, but his mind was still on the matter of reorganizing the police force. "Your Highness means to participate in police management?" The chubby mayor looked at the president of the Chamber of Commerce in surprise, then quickly apologized to Joseph with a smile. "Your Highness, you are so noble. How could you possibly deal with thieves, murderers, and the like?" The president of the Chamber of Commerce quickly nodded in agreement. "That's right, and the police department has a lot of trivial and very tedious matters." He was inwardly distressed. "My goodness, Your Highness, you're just here to gain some prestige. Please don't be so serious. If you mess up the police system, won't Paris be in an uproar?" Joseph was a bit helpless, caught in this back and forth with the 2 men, when a woman's shrill voice suddenly came from outside the city hall. "No, Lenoir couldn't possibly have committed suicide. You must catch the murderer." The voice would suddenly become sharp, then turn into an operatic lament. "Lenoir was so cheerful. We were going to get married next month. How could he kill himself? Don't close the case. The murderer is still at large." The chubby mayor's face immediately darkened. He said angrily, "Why is she here again?" Flesselles immediately waved his hand at a guard. "Get her out of here. Can't you see who's here today?" He then turned to Joseph and apologized with a smile. "Ah, Your Highness, she is just a crazy woman. Don't let her affect your mood." Joseph looked out the window and asked, "I heard her mention a murderer. What's the situation?" Mayor Lefebvre quickly said, "A month ago, her fiancé, Viscount Lenoir, committed suicide by swallowing his sword. Oh, the case is clear. There's no doubt about it. But this woman seems to have gone mad. She insists it was murder. She made such a scene that we had to forbid her from entering City Hall, but she comes back every few days to scream outside. Joseph said, slightly puzzled, "Suicide by swallowing a sword?" The thin man sitting to the right of Lefebvre put his hand on his chest and gestured. "Your Highness, that is to place the hilt of the sword on the ground, swallow the tip, and then press down forcefully. The sword pierces the back of the neck. It's a very common method of suicide. Note 1. Joseph remembered that the chubby mayor had introduced him earlier as Viscount Guizot, the police superintendent of Paris, and thus the highest authority in Paris law enforcement. Seeing that the crown prince seemed interested, Guizot eagerly explained. "A little over a month ago, Viscount Lenoir's servant reported that his master had died in his bedroom. I sent people to investigate and found that he had committed suicide by swallowing his sword." Joseph frowned. "How are you so sure it was suicide? Was there a suicide note, or had he shown any signs of being tired of life before?" "None of that," Guizot said. "However, Lenoir used his own sword, and no valuables were missing. There were no signs of a struggle in the room, and there were no other injuries on his body. You must understand, Your Highness, Lenoir fought in the war in America. He was over 6 French feet tall and a master of fighting. If anyone could put a sword in his mouth in broad daylight without harming him at all, that person could only be himself. 6 French feet was over 1.9 meters, so he was indeed a tall and strong man." Joseph narrowed his eyes slightly. He had seen similar murder methods in many detective novels. Without any signs of suicidal intent or a suicide note, only the police of the 18th century, who had no police academy training and were isolated from information, would crudely classify it as a suicide. He looked at Guizot and said, "No, besides himself, there's another kind of person who could have done it." "Your Highness must be joking," the chubby mayor said with a laugh and waved his hand. "Do you mean that person has magic?" Joseph said unhurriedly, "No, he just knows how to treat teeth." "Treat teeth? You mean a dentist?" "Yes, a dentist." The few people around him were all stunned. A scene flashed through their minds. Lenoir, following the dentist's instructions, obediently opens his mouth. The dentist then covers his eyes with a white cloth used for surgery, turns around, takes the sword hanging on the wall, and effortlessly plunges it into his mouth. Blood immediately gushes out. Note 1, because 18th century Europe favored fast and agile swordsmanship, the nobles' ceremonial swords were thin and light, making it difficult to slit their own throats. Therefore, they often used the method of swallowing the sword to commit suicide. Additionally, this suicide method would leave the person in a kneeling, prayer-like position after death, which made it widely favored by the nobility. Chapter 5. The Duke of Orléans' Counterattack. Guizot was the first to react. He summoned his subordinate from the far end of the banquet table and instructed him, "César, take some men and go check if any dentists had contact with Lenoir a month ago." Joseph thought for a moment and added, "If a dentist went to Lenoir's house, his servant should know." "But the servant's testimony didn't mention—" Guizot suddenly froze. "You're right. César, question the servant as well." "Yes, sir." Outside City Hall, Lenoir's fiancé's cries stopped. It was unclear if the guards had driven her away or if someone had told her that the case was being reinvestigated. In the afternoon, the chubby mayor and a group of City Hall officials came to invite Joseph to the evening banquet. A policeman named César suddenly rushed in and whispered to Guizot. Guizot's eyes lit up. He turned and bowed to Joseph, his hand on his chest, and said in a loud voice, "Your Highness, just as you predicted, after the servant was arrested, he quickly confessed. He said that a dentist had indeed visited Lenore's house on the day of the incident and that the servant had taken money from the man to give false testimony." The president of the Chamber of Commerce urgently asked, "What about the murderer?" César searched the dentist's residence and found that he was British. His brother, who had fought in America, was killed by Lenore. He came to take revenge, Guizot said, lowering his head and clearing his throat. However, César accidentally stabbed him to death during the pursuit. Upon hearing this, the dozen or so City Hall officials all looked at Joseph. Their eyes were filled with surprise and admiration. At the luncheon, the Crown Prince had, based on just a few clues, deduced the situation of the murderer. And now, the police's actual investigation results were almost exactly what he had said. The chubby mayor immediately praised him loudly. Thankfully, the Crown Prince is so wise and brilliant. Otherwise, that murderer would not have been brought to justice. He then turned to the official behind him and said with a smile, "That woman will finally stop making a scene at City Hall." That night, at the repeated invitation of the president of the Chamber of Commerce, Flesselles, Joseph stayed at his private villa. City Hall was too far from the Palace of Versailles, and he didn't want to travel back and forth. Joseph reclined on the soft bed, staring intently at the wall opposite him, feeling a bit frustrated. The chubby mayor and the president of the Chamber of Commerce had been giving him the runaround all day, refusing to let him interfere with the police department. He rolled over, thinking that if he couldn't convince them tomorrow, he would write to the Queen and ask her to appoint him to the police department. Outside, Aymard lightly knocked on the door. "Your Highness, are you asleep?" "Not yet. Come in." Aymard pushed the door open and respectfully handed a letter to Joseph. "Your Highness, this was delivered from the police department. It seems to have been left by that Mr. Lenoir's fiancée." "Her? A letter for me?" Aymard's voice was heavy. "Well, she committed suicide tonight to join him." Joseph felt his mood turn heavy. He hadn't expected there to be such a devoted woman in the world. He unfolded the letter. The first few lines thanked César and the other police officers. Then she expressed her deep desire to thank the Crown Prince in person for finding the true murderer. But due to their vast difference in social status, she could not meet him. She could only thank him in this way. The words of gratitude filled an entire page. At the end of the letter, she wrote that without Lenoir, she had no reason to live. The police had avenged Lenoir, and she would now follow her beloved. After her death, she wanted to bequeath all her property to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and the Police Bureau, respectively. This gift surprised Joseph. Aymard said softly, "Your Highness, it is said that Miss Esther left behind 4,000 livres in property." By the bank of the Seine. The Palais Royal, located here, was once a palace of Louis XIV and now belonged to the Duke of Orleans. The House of Orleans had served as regents during the reign of Louis XV, and their power was immense. Over 100 years of accumulation, they had an immense fortune that rivaled the royal families. The current Duke of Orleans, since his father's time, had used this as his foundation to continuously expand his influence. Although he held no actual official position, he was able to participate in cabinet meetings, and his power was not insignificant. In addition, he was a skilled actor and was generous with his money. He was a welcome guest in various political circles and held great prestige among the nobility. A luxurious carriage drove into the Palais Royal and stopped in front of the flower-lined arcade. The Duke of Orleans stepped down the stairs that a servant had set up for him. The sound of a speech came from the garden nearby. He turned to glance in that direction, a faint smile on his lips. He knew it was a meeting of an organization that was dissatisfied with the royal family. Yes, the Palais Royal was now a secret base for anti-royalists. The future leaders of the Feuillants, Girondins, and Jacobins often held meetings here. Additionally, various prohibited items, including controlled firearms, could be sold here. The Duke of Orleans used his influence to provide them with protection. He had been painstakingly building his network for decades, and he would wholeheartedly support anything that would help overthrow the royal family. The Duke of Orleans tossed his coat to a servant and strode into the main hall. As soon as a guard opened the door to the hall, he saw his son hitting a maid. He cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Philippe, what's wrong with you?" The boy turned his head. It was the slanted-eyed boy who had taken the math exam with Joseph that morning. He pointed at the maid and shrieked, "This idiot! She brought me hot tea when I'm in a bad mood. What has made you so upset?" "That Joseph!" Philippe clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. "He must have cheated. There's no way he could have known university courses." The Duke of Orleans asked about the whole matter and couldn't help but frown. He hadn't expected the Crown Prince to impress a great scholar like Lagrange. The king's line finally produced a simpleton like Louis XVI. Why was his son so outstanding? He had to suppress the Crown Prince's prestige before it grew. Otherwise, overthrowing the king would become even more difficult. He comforted his son for a few moments, then saw his butler approach quickly. The butler bowed and said, "Sir, a Mr. Froissart wishes to see you." "Lever's confidant? Tell him to wait for me in the study." In the study, the Duke of Orleans read the letter that Froissart had brought. A cold sneer appeared in his eyes as he handed the letter to the butler standing nearby. The Crown Prince may have a bit of cleverness, but he's a child after all. If he had just spent his time at City Hall, I really couldn't do anything to him. But he's actively seeking to get involved in police management. The butler looked at the letter and sighed in a low voice. Paris has always been a mixed bag, especially the slums. Robberies and murders are non-stop. Even veterans with decades of municipal experience are at a loss. The Crown Prince is asking for trouble. The Duke of Orleans smiled and nodded. "Since Joseph is so confident, we will help him gain a reputation." He turned to Froissart. "Go back and tell Lefebvre to make the Crown Prince the police commissioner of the Saint-Antoine district." The police commissioner was a powerful position, second only to the police superintendent. Each one was in charge of all police matters in a major district of Paris. There were only 6 police commissioners in total in Paris. "Yes, Your Grace." After Lefebvre's confidant had left, the Duke of Orleans instructed his butler, "Tell the Paris News and the Citizens Daily to pay close attention to crime and police management in the Saint-Antoine district. They should write in detail about the head of the police there, our Crown Prince." "Yes," the butler bowed and left. The Duke of Orleans walked to the window, pleasantly looking at the garden of the Palais Royal in the night, a smirk on his lips. When the Saint-Antoine district becomes a complete mess, let's see how that Austrian slut will protect her son, the Crown Prince. Soon people will think you're just as useless as your father. The Austrian slut he was referring to was Queen Marie, who was from Austria. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Starting as a minor official. Early the next morning. Paris Municipal Commissioner Lefebvre, upon seeing the president of the Chamber of Commerce, waved at him with a face full of jiggling fat. After exchanging a few pleasantries, he said, "By the way, what do you think of the case the Crown Prince solved yesterday?" Flesselles said with emotion, "The Crown Prince's intelligence truly shocked me. I genuinely look forward to the day he leads France." "Who wouldn't agree?" Lefebvre said with a smile. "After careful consideration, I believe His Highness is completely capable of serving as a police commissioner." After some persuasion from him, Flesselles was finally swayed. After all, the Crown Prince himself wanted to work in the police department, so it was better to do him a favor. Meanwhile, as soon as Joseph entered City Hall, he saw the chubby mayor come up to him, his face wreathed in smiles. "Your Highness, yesterday the police commissioner of the Saint Antoine district, old Simeon, took a long leave due to illness. I was wondering if you would be interested in serving as the police commissioner." "The Saint Antoine district?" The president of the Chamber of Commerce was taken aback. He lowered his voice and said to Lefebvre, "Why didn't you say it was there just now? It's too chaotic. What if His Highness—" The municipal commissioner quietly interrupted him. "The Crown Prince won't be on patrol. Nothing will happen." Flesselles wanted to say more, but the chubby mayor blocked him. "Your Highness, the people Simeon left behind are all experienced. You can rest assured." Joseph was a bit surprised by how quickly the two men had changed their minds, but he immediately accepted. "All right, I accept this position." He had learned yesterday that a police commissioner managed all police matters for a major district, with only the police superintendent above them, and it was unlikely that City Hall would make him the police superintendent given his age. Lefebvre immediately launched into another round of flattery. He didn't stop until he had escorted the Crown Prince to the police bureau and oversaw the signing of the appointment documents. Only then did he leave satisfied. Joseph wasted no time. With Police Superintendent Guizot personally escorting him, he headed directly to the Saint Antoine district to take up his post. After an hour's drive, the carriage entered the Saint Antoine district, and the surroundings immediately became even more dilapidated. The expressions of the residents were vacant. Rickety shacks were everywhere. Homeless people, emitting a foul stench, were slumped in corners. Half of the shops were closed, and there were very few street vendors. Only the prostitutes, dressed in cheap clothes, half-heartedly solicited customers, bringing a little bit of life to the area. After a short while, Joseph saw protection money being collected several times. Then he encountered two groups of gang members fighting on the street, with blood splattered everywhere. Passers-by who saw them from a distance lowered their heads and fled. There were no police in sight from beginning to end. Guizot, however, seemed used to this scene. He just happily talked about balls, and even encouraged the Crown Prince to attend an upcoming costume ball next month. Joseph thought to himself, no wonder this was the first place to see an uprising during the French Revolution. Anyone who lives in this kind of environment for a few years, accompanied by extreme poverty, is bound to accumulate a great deal of resentment. Once it explodes, the destructive power will be astonishing. He let out a long sigh. It seemed he was right to come to the Saint Antoine district. Another half an hour later, the carriage stopped in front of a small courtyard surrounded by uneven wooden planks. Inside the courtyard was a dilapidated building with no sign. Guizot eagerly gestured toward the outside of the carriage. "Your Highness, this is the Saint Antoine District Police Station." A police officer outside the courtyard saw that it was the police superintendent getting out of the carriage and hurried inside to announce it. A moment later, several police officials led a group of people out to greet them. Guizot first bowed to Joseph, then looked at the crowd in front of him, cleared his throat, and said in a loud voice, "The esteemed Crown Prince has graced us with his presence. From now on, he will serve as the police commissioner here." His assistant immediately displayed the appointment documents. Everyone at the Saint Antoine District Police Station was stunned and at a loss. Why would such an important person come to our little place? But isn't the Crown Prince only 13 years old? Lord, he's going to be the police commissioner? The police station is going to be a total mess. After a long time, a tall, thin man with sunken eyes came forward and bowed respectfully. Your Royal Highness, your arrival brightens our humble place. Benoit, the Assistant Police Commissioner, sincerely welcomes you on behalf of everyone here." He then turned and introduced the people beside him. "Your Highness, this is First Inspector Magoni of the second team, and this is First Inspector—" The few first inspectors hurried forward to bow, and Joseph smiled as he returned their greetings one by one. He had seen in the City Hall documents that the Assistant Police Commissioner was the second in command of the police station, while the first inspectors were in charge of dispatching police officers and patrols, and usually had more than a dozen subordinates. They were the middle management of the police station. Benoit and the others led Joseph into the dilapidated police station. The one named Magoni quickly came up to him, his face full of admiration. "Your Highness, I heard from Cesar that you solved a murder case in just a little over 10 minutes yesterday. It makes us police officers who have been doing this for more than a decade feel ashamed." Joseph hadn't expected the news to reach the Saint Antoine district so quickly, so he quickly said a few humble words. Once inside the police station's old building, Joseph frowned at the group of police officers who were following him. He instructed them not to follow him and to go about their business. He also sent Gaizet away. The surroundings finally became quiet. Benoit led Joseph to the police commissioner's office, where he looked around and sat down at the large oak desk. Benoit said with a smile, "Your Highness, would you like tea or hot cocoa? I will immediately prepare a banquet for you." "Thank you, but there's no need," Joseph said, waving his hand to interrupt him. "Please bring me the documents about the district, as well as the case files and personnel files." Benoit was a bit surprised. He had thought the Crown Prince was just here to play for a few days, but he was serious. The documents were quickly brought in. Joseph had only read a few pages when his brows furrowed. In the last month alone, there had been 28 murders, 63 robberies, and 220 thefts in the Saint Antoine district. And the population of this district was only 80,000. These numbers were only for reported crimes. There was no telling how many unreported ones there were. The situation was much worse than he had imagined. Joseph then picked up the police officer files. The entire Saint Antoine district had 181 police officers. Of those, 120 had paid for their positions, while only 61 had joined the police force through inheritance, recruitment, and other means. In addition, there were also self-organized civilian patrol teams with a total of more than 200 people. He had seen in documentaries that the most common thing for police officers in Paris at that time was to extort money. They would extort money from anyone, from vendors to criminals to victims. As for fighting crime, they would get to it when they had time. After all, they had to earn back the money they spent to buy their positions, right? Therefore, public safety largely depended on the civilian patrol teams. But they were volunteers, they had no law enforcement authority, and their weapons were crude. They could only intimidate thugs, they couldn't even make arrests. So the truly usable police force was probably only those 60-odd recruits. Chapter 7. Reorganizing the Police Force. Joseph finished flipping through the remaining documents and learned that these 180-odd police officers hadn't received their full salaries in 4 months. Their salaries were paid 20% by the City Hall and the remaining 80% by the Chamber of Commerce. The chamber often couldn't raise enough money due to a lack of cooperation from businesses, so the police officers' salaries would be shortchanged. Joseph frowned and shook his head. 60-odd people were in charge of a major district with 80,000 people, and their salaries were in arrears? No wonder there were 28 murders in a single month. And no wonder that at the beginning of the French Revolution, when a large number of citizens rushed to the Hôtel des Invalides to steal muskets, no one stopped them. Everything starts with the people. It seems the top priority is to solve the manpower problem. Joseph pondered for a long time, recalling various advanced police concepts from his previous life. He wrote 4 or 5 more pages, outlining a framework for reorganizing the police force, and finally let out a sigh of relief. He put down his pen, looked at the first item he had written, reorganize the civilian patrol teams, and called for Assistant Police Commissioner Benoit. Please gather all the police officers and civilian patrol teams in the Saint-Antoine district to assemble here tomorrow morning. Benoit was taken aback. Your Highness, you mean everyone? That's right, everyone. I will have Viscount Guizot transfer people from other districts to help with patrols, so you don't need to worry. Yes. Joseph then turned to Aymar and said, please send someone to withdraw 20,000 livres from my private funds. When the sun rose again, nearly 400 police officers and civilian patrol members were gathered on the spacious field in front of the Paris Police Bureau, forming 2 rather messy formations. Although they had been told they were going to meet the Crown Prince, their new boss, their hearts were still filled with uncontrollable nervousness and shock when they saw the handsome teenager in a red double-breasted uniform and a tricorn hat on the wooden platform in front of them. At exactly 9 a.m., with a military drum roll, Joseph raised his hand and said in a loud voice, "Good morning, gentlemen. I don't like to waste time with nonsense. I only have 3 points, so please listen carefully." His voice, though youthful, had a strong presence. First, from now on, all civilian patrol teams in the Saint-Antoine district will be incorporated into the police department and become official police officers. Of course, those who are unwilling are not forced. The people in the civilian patrol teams immediately went wild. They knew that buying a police position cost 500 livres, and with one simple sentence from the Crown Prince, they could all become official police officers? In Paris, the reputation of the police might not have been great, but it was still a government position with status and a stable income. These poor, self-organized men who had to protect themselves would never have dared to dream of becoming police officers. This was an instant step up in the world. Joseph signaled for everyone to be quiet and continued. Second, everyone will be evaluated from now on. The evaluation will include character, physical fitness, and professional ability. Based on your scores, you will be granted a police rank, similar to military ranks, divided into police officer, inspector, and sergeant, with 3 levels for each rank. In the future, as your rank is promoted, your salary will also increase accordingly. A probationary police officer will start with a monthly salary of 18 livres. The salaries for level 1, 2, and 3 police officers are 22, 25, and 30 livres, respectively. The salary for an inspector starts at 40 livres. He pointed to the wooden crates next to him. Here are 20,000 livres. After the ranks have been assigned, you will be able to collect this month's salary. From now on, your salaries will be paid here in cash, and there will not be a single day of delay. The crowd erupted again. 30 livres was close to the income of a city hall official. 22 livres was enough for a comfortable life, and it was being paid in cash. Before, the Paris police officer's salary was only 16 livres, and it was often withheld, so they only received a little over half of it. Everyone's eyes were shining brightly, reflecting the light of the silver coins. They had to fight like their lives depended on it to get a good evaluation. Being rated as a level 3 police officer would mean at least 10, no, 20 years less struggle. As for the pot-bellied ones, they looked at their own figures and started to get anxious. Third, Joseph's voice interrupted everyone's thoughts. From now on, we will implement a performance evaluation system. This means you will be assessed monthly based on indicators like the case closure rate, the number of dispatches, and the number of complaints. If you do well, you will receive a bonus. If you don't do well, your salary will be penalized. Promotions in rank and position will also be heavily based on your performance. He looked at everyone present. I have finished speaking. I believe everyone is in agreement. Now, everyone, begin the reorganization and evaluation on the spot. The reorganization work must be completed within 10 days. Yes, a thunderous roar immediately rose from below the platform. The former members of the civilian patrol teams had their faces flushed with excitement and their hands were trembling. Cries of "Long live the Crown Prince" echoed throughout the area. They had never imagined that with this one unexpected gathering today, their fates would change so dramatically. They could foresee that their lives from now on would be filled with hope. The Crown Prince had become a savior in their hearts. A sacred light radiated from his entire being. Hundreds of people secretly swore that they would do their absolute best to repay the Crown Prince for his great kindness. Immediately, several of the Crown Prince's guards ran over. Each of them picked a few dozen police officers and led them away to begin the reorganization. While Joseph's measures might seem commonplace in the modern world, in the 18th century, they were absolutely the most advanced concepts. Unified organization, detailed division of labor, performance-based assessment, and rewarding the capable. These were all groundbreaking improvements. According to the original historical timeline, it would not be until several decades later that the brilliant Napoleon would begin police reform. And what he did, which was not even half of what Joseph did, would become a model for all of Europe to follow. 2 days later, the residents of the Saint Antoine district began to notice many new things. At the entrance to every street, a wooden box with a slit at the top was hung up. The words "Police Complaint Box" were painted on it in large letters, with smaller text next to it explaining that all complaints about the police could be written down and put in the box. The police commissioner would personally check and handle them. The results of the handling would be immediately made public. And in many populated areas, a large number of wooden stands were being built. According to the carpenters, these were public safety booths requested by the police bureau. In the future, police officers would be on duty in them 24/7, ready to support patrolling officers at any time. The completed novel, My Wife, Please Stop, a gender-swapped fantasy, is now available in an audio version. You are welcome to read it. My Wife, Please Stop synopsis. A surgeon is suddenly transmigrated to another world with a gender imbalance where women are strong and men are weak. He becomes a young master named Zhu Yang. Women with powerful spiritual energy can move mountains, fill seas, and blot out the sun and moon, conquering this world with their strength. I, Zhu Yang, will conquer the world with my with my soft power. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. A Tough Problem. 3 days later. The Municipal Commissioner's Office. Sir, are you aware of the Crown Prince's reorganization of the police force? Froissart looked at the municipal commissioner with a worried expression. The Duke of Orleans' intention was to make the Crown Prince look bad, but now he's doing so well. The morale of the police is high. I'm worried that... Lefebvre carefully selected a bottle of wine from the wine cabinet. Relax, Georges. Someone will take care of this. Someone will take care of it? Who? Lefebvre held the wine bottle up to the light, admiring the purple liquid, and said unhurriedly, I already spread the news about what the Crown Prince is doing yesterday. I'm guessing that some people are already starting to get antsy. As he spoke, Police Superintendent Guizot knocked and entered the office. He gave a brief greeting, his expression urgent. Sir, you must go and advise His Royal Highness. Oh, the chubby mayor took out a corkscrew, pretending to be puzzled. Advise him on what? Guizot impatiently tapped his leather boots on the floor. Haven't you heard? His Highness has completely changed the police force. This will seriously affect the public safety of the Saint Antoine district. He described Joseph's police reorganization and then said with a bitter face, "To be honest, if anyone else dared to cause such a great upheaval, I would have fired them long ago. But this is His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince. What do you think?" Lefebvre forcefully pulled out the cork, sniffed the aroma from the bottle's opening, and shook his head. "Viscount Guizot, what the Crown Prince is doing is an internal matter of the police department. It's difficult for me to intervene. Besides, I have to deal with funding issues lately. You know, the Chamber of Commerce's allocation is limited, and the Crown Prince has added a large number of police officers. Almost half of the police department's funding will have to be allocated to the Saint-Antoine district."
"How can that be?" Guizot exclaimed, shocked. "He can't take up so much of the funding. You must help me find a solution." Lefebvre feigned a difficult moment of contemplation, poured a glass of wine for Guizot, and a hidden smile flashed in his eyes. "It's not that there's no room for negotiation. For example, you could make the Crown Prince retreat in the face of difficulties. I will do my best to cooperate with you." Guizot looked at him intently, drained the wine in his glass in one gulp, nodded hard, and left with a dark expression. As the office door closed, Frossard looked at the chubby mayor in surprise. "Sir, how did you know Viscount Guizot would come?" Lefebvre handed him the other glass of wine and said with a smile, "Although the Crown Prince has some ability, he's still just a child. He only sees what's in front of him and ignores the consequences." "Consequences?" Lefebvre took a sip of wine. "Besides the Chamber of Commerce's allocation, the police department's biggest source of income is the share from the sale of police positions. When I spread the news that the Crown Prince was promoting commoners to police officers, people who were planning to buy police positions would surely wonder if they would still need to buy them in the future. Who would be willing to pay at a time like this? This is the biggest source of easy money for the police," the chubby mayor said with a proud look, shaking his wine glass. "And if I withhold some of the funds the City Hall gives Guizot, they will definitely go crazy. What do you think they'll do?" Frossard's eyes lit up. "They'll do everything in their power to stop the Crown Prince." Exactly. The sun was setting. Police Superintendent Guizot's carriage finally arrived at the Saint-Antoine District Police Station. In Joseph's office, Guizot bowed respectfully and forced a smile, flattering him. "Your Highness, you are truly amazing. With this reorganization, the police force has been completely revitalized." After a round of flattery, he put on a worried expression. "However, the people from the civilian control teams that you've incorporated into the police force barely know how to use a sword, and they've never even touched a crossbow or a musket. They need at least 3 or 4 months of training, otherwise they won't even be able to handle the thugs on the streets. During these few months of their training, no one will be doing the patrol work they were originally responsible for. You previously had me transfer over 120 police officers from other districts, but their public safety pressure is also very high. They'll have to go back soon." Joseph invited him to sit down and said with a smile, "It shouldn't take that long. I have a simple training method. We can complete combat training in about 10 days. I'm sure borrowing police officers from other districts for a little over 10 days is not a problem." "Well, of course, that's fine," Guizot said, putting on a serious face. "But training is extremely important and cannot be taken lightly." "Thank you for your reminder," Joseph said. "Rest assured, I have it under control." "All right," Guizot nodded reluctantly, still unwilling to give up. "Your Highness, there's another matter. You have suddenly brought in over 200 new police officers. The police bureau doesn't have enough equipment for all of them." "You don't need to worry about the equipment. I will handle it myself." Guizot hadn't expected the tough problem he had carefully prepared to be brushed off by the Crown Prince. He tried to bring up a few more problems with the police reform, but they also had no effect. In the end, he had no choice but to leave dejectedly. His mind was in a mess on the way back. It seemed the Crown Prince was determined to throw the police bureau into chaos.
From now on, the City Hall's allocation to him would probably be minimal. Actually, he was overthinking it. Joseph didn't care about the small amount of money from the police department's allocation, and the fact that the police were funded by a civilian chamber of commerce was already highly abnormal. He had all kinds of technologies and advanced concepts from his previous life, and plenty of ways to make money. He had to fill the whole of France's $2 billion in foreign debt. Funding a police system was a small matter. In the carriage, Guizot's eyes gradually turned cold. He had to get the Crown Prince out of the police system as soon as possible and restore everything to the way it was. Shortly after Guizot left, two exquisite carriages arrived at the Saint-Antoine District Police Station. Louis XVI's attendant got out of the carriage. He put on his gold-rimmed monocle, frowned as he looked at the shabby police station, and confirmed that this was the right place. Only then did he lead his servants inside. Upon meeting Joseph, he first completed the entire court etiquette procedure, then respectfully handed him a letter. "Your Highness, this is a letter from His Majesty the King." He then gestured for the servant behind him to open an exquisite wooden box. "Her Majesty the Queen learned that you didn't even bring your royal chef, and was afraid that you wouldn't eat well, so she had these made for you." Joseph looked into the box. It was full of meticulously made cakes, strawberry pies, cream puffs, and various kinds of candies. He smiled bitterly and rubbed his head. Just looking at them made him feel overwhelmed by the sweetness, but he knew that this was a genuine expression of Queen Marie's care. He then broke the wax seal on the envelope, unfolded the letter, and saw Louis XVI's beautiful and flowing Italian handwriting. "My dearest Joseph, I hope this letter brings you all my love and warmth. Here, as your father, I want to express my deep care and concern for you. Do you know, I finally finished the salamander fountain. I swear to the Lord that it is absolutely the most magnificent work of art." He goes on and on about his luck. "When I finished making it, I wanted to share it with you first, and that's when I learned you had gone to work at City Hall. I am so sorry. I've truly been in my workshop for too long and didn't even know this. How are you living in Paris? Your mother is really something. You're only 13. How can she let you do such hard work? This is what Brienne and the others should be doing. Oh, by the way, I heard that you've completed your university courses. How did you do it? That's so incredible. I am so proud of you. My son, you are the pride of the entire royal family. I am certain that you will one day restore France to the glory of the Sun King." He praises his son for an entire page. "Joseph, I've heard that you are now reforming the police department and that you're doing a great job. You just do whatever you want. If any problems arise, I'll take care of them for you. I will always support you. If you feel tired, just come back to the Palace of Versailles. Your mother is always worried that you're not eating well." Finally, I want you to know that no matter where you are, you will always be my dearest son. I kiss you 1,000 times. Although the letter was full of French-style schmaltz, Joseph still felt the deep fatherly love within it. He took a deep breath. His parents in his previous life had poor health and had passed away one after another while he was in college. He had longed for the warmth of family for a long time. At this moment, he felt a sense of warmth in his heart and hoped that in this life he could live peacefully and long with his family. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Results. In the blink of an eye, it was the 10th day after Joseph took over the police force. Dust billowed on the empty lot in front of the Saint-Antoine District Police Station. More than 200 new police officers, in their crisp blue military uniforms and blue and white broad-brimmed hats, were sweating as they practiced with their strangely shaped weapons. Joseph had gotten these military uniforms from the army stationed in the suburbs of Paris, paying several thousand livres for them. At the time, police in all of France and even Europe wore whatever they wanted and had no uniforms. The police in the Saint-Antoine district were decades ahead of them in terms of attire alone. For the police officers' weapons and equipment, Joseph did not choose muskets, which were no different from a stick for starting a fire without months of hard practice. He didn't even equip the police with many swords. Instead, he had carpenters craft more than 200 2-meter-long, Y-shaped wooden forks. In addition, every 2 people were given a shield. These items, though they looked simple, were extremely practical. Security guards at airports and train stations in the modern world use this same set of equipment, and when combined with specific formations, they are very effective for riot control. These police officers, who came from the lowest levels of Parisian society, cherished their new identity as police officers. They trained for 10 hours a day, and not a single one of them complained. Joseph looked at the training ground with satisfaction. As planned, starting at noon today, this brand new police force would begin to be responsible for the public safety of the Saint-Antoine district. Of course, criminal cases would still be handled by the original 60 veteran police officers. As for those who had paid to become police officers, Joseph had basically classified them all as the logistics team, responsible for chores like cleaning and moving things. Their salaries were, naturally, the lowest tier. The Saint-Antoine District Police Station now had 50 detectives, 236 patrol officers, and 125 support staff. This was considered a strong and well-equipped force in all of Paris. It's important to note that these more than 280 main police officers were all in high spirits and had excellent morale, completely lacking the rascally appearance of police officers in other districts. And these were people who could truly maintain public safety, completely different from the old police whose main job was extortion. In terms of sense of responsibility, they were worth 8 of the old police officers. It can be said that this was truly a modern police force. Under the hot sun, after lunch, with an order from Joseph, nearly 300 police officers shouted loud slogans and left the police station in formation to formally take over the public safety of the Saint-Antoine district. They had previously patrolled their own district and knew exactly where problems were likely to occur, so they were rich in experience. Now, with their official status and an advanced management model, their ability to control crime had increased exponentially. The citizens had already gotten the news, but besides taking a few extra glances at the police's impressive uniforms, they didn't pay much attention. What could they possibly expect from the French police? On Rue de Lorraine, on the east side of the Saint-Antoine district, the sounds of vulgar curses and roars came from a back alley. 4 or 5 burly men in black vests and felt hats cornered a middle-aged man against a wall. The wooden clubs and iron axes in their hands swung back and forth. "You dare to be late on the Viper Gang's money? Are you tired of living?" The middle-aged man was so scared that he huddled into a ball. "Gentlemen, I'll pay next week, for the love of God." "You've been late on protection money 3 times this year already," a red-haired man said with a cold, fake smile, gesturing to his men. "According to the rules, we have to teach you a lesson." "No, please don't." Before the middle-aged man could finish speaking, a burly man in a felt hat swung his club and brought it down hard on the man's arm. The sound of bones shattering was instantly heard, accompanied by a scream that didn't sound human. The red-haired man used his foot to press down on the middle-aged man, who was writhing in pain on the ground. "Remember, next week, if you dare to be late again, it will be your other hand." As he was speaking, 4 people in blue military uniforms and broad-brimmed hats suddenly appeared at the mouth of the alley and looked at the groaning, injured man on the ground. The red-haired man recognized 2 of them and said casually, "Baptiste and Quirion, I heard you became police officers. Those clothes fit you well." These 2 were former members of the civilian patrol team and were familiar with the Viper Gang. The red-haired man swung the knife in his hand. "I'm collecting payment here. Now get out of my way." The police officer named Quirion suddenly pulled out a whistle and blew it hard. He then pointed at the men and shouted, "I'm arresting you for committing a crime in the street." He used to be a tanner. To ensure the safety of his family, he had volunteered to join the patrol team, patrolling the area every day from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. When he encountered thugs like the Viper Gang, he would usually avoid them if he could. But now he was a real police officer. He had a high salary of 35 livres a month. His wife and 2 children had white bread to eat every day, and they could even eat meat every few days. This was a situation he had only ever dreamed of before. Now he only wanted to do one thing: do his absolute best to maintain public safety in the district, to maintain his family's happy life, and to repay the Crown Prince. Besides, catching more criminals meant better performance, and higher performance scores meant higher bonuses. He and the other 3 police officers shouted at the same time, "In the name of the Crown Prince, charge!" The red-haired man snorted disdainfully and waved to his subordinates. "Teach these idiots a lesson." He was very confident. He thought that patrol teams and even the police were just cowardly braggarts who would run away screaming like women at the slightest sight of blood. However, he was wrong this time. 3 of the police officers took the 2-meter-long Y-shaped wooden forks from their backs and stepped forward in unison, using the forks to pin the 2 charging Viper Gang members at the waist. The head of the fork was wide enough to cover a man's arm. It was a security tool from the future, a riot fork, so it was easy to hit a target even with your eyes closed. Another police officer, who was holding a spear, seized the opportunity and jabbed the leg of the gang member on the left. With a wail, the man clutched his foot and rolled on the ground. The Viper Gang member next to him gritted his teeth and glared, wildly swinging his short sword, but was blocked by the wooden fork and couldn't reach the police officer at all. The red-haired man was furious. He led the charge, and although there were 4 of them, they were blocked by the riot forks and couldn't get close to the police. 2 more of his subordinates were sneak-attacked with spears and stabbed in the calves. The red-haired man felt incredibly frustrated. The fighting skills he had honed for more than 10 years, with his life on the line, were completely useless against the police's strange formation. This was the security combat method that Joseph had taught the police force, which was commonly used at train stations and airports in the modern world. Its main features were not to kill the enemy, but just to hold them back and also to protect oneself. Most importantly, this fighting style was simple and easy to learn. Anyone could master it with just a week of practice. The red-haired man's teeth were ground down to powder. He couldn't understand why these police officers were so difficult to deal with today. He quickly decided to give up. He had also almost been stabbed, and decisively waved his hand, shouting, "Retreat!" However, half a street away, at a public safety booth, the police officer on duty had already heard the whistle and had immediately dispatched 4 people to help. When they arrived at the narrow alley, they ran into the fleeing Viper Gang. The police officer leading the team shouted, "In the name of the Crown Prince," and 3 riot forks were instantly put in front of them. Chapter 10. A Big Mess. The men from the Viper Gang only resisted for a moment before they were pinned to the ground by the riot forks from both sides, groaning in terror. While thanking his colleagues who had come to help, Quirion tied up the criminals one by one. Throughout the day, similar scenes appeared all over the Saint-Antoine district. The police officers were as if they had been injected with a stimulant. As soon as they saw someone committing a crime, they would immediately shout, "In the name of the Crown Prince," and charge forward, using the riot forks and spears to teach the rascals a harsh lesson. In a short time, the thieves, robbers, and gang members of the Saint-Antoine district were in a pathetic state, constantly on edge, and no longer had their arrogant swagger from before. The residents of the Saint-Antoine district, seeing the police cracking down on crime everywhere, were both surprised and overjoyed. Many of the most notorious gang members and murderers were arrested one after another. They had never seen police officers who were so serious about maintaining public order. The common people of this era had very low expectations for public safety. They would accept being stolen from or robbed as just bad luck, and they were already very satisfied as long as their lives were not in danger. The new police force's actions had already far exceeded their expectations. Soon, people began to voluntarily bring water and food to the police and cheered for the officers who had caught criminals. And the encouraged police officers worked even harder. It didn't take long for the citizens to learn a new trick. When they encountered a crime, they would shout, "In the name of the Crown Prince," and there was a high chance that it would scare off the criminals. The Palais Royal. The Duke of Orléans looked at the Paris news on the table, his expression not looking good. The headline on the front page was, "Public Safety in the Antoine District in Chaos, Crown Prince Oversees Police Reform."
Compared to the vague words in the Paris news, which he controlled, the other small newspapers were much more direct. Headlines read, "Crown Prince rectifies police. Saint Antoine District's public safety improves. Saint Antoine District citizens praise new police force." And "Crown Prince's brilliant mind solves dentist murder case in 3 minutes." The Duke of Orleans felt a rush of irritation. He had originally intended to use the chaos of the Saint Antoine District to have the newspapers thoroughly humiliate the Crown Prince. He hadn't expected to help him increase his prestige instead. This Joseph could completely transform the police force in just over 10 days. His methods were not at all what you would expect from a 13-year-old boy. Thinking of this, he suddenly frowned. Could the Austrian slut be using her son's hand to start a purge of Parisian officials, starting with the police bureau? The more he thought about it, the more he felt this was the only possibility. After all, a young crown prince alone could never have accomplished all of this. In that case, he had to mess up the queen's plans even more. He absolutely couldn't let the royal family make any waves. The Duke of Orleans thought for a moment, quickly wrote a letter, and called his butler. "Give this letter to Lefebvre. Tell him that he must do this no matter the cost. I will consider helping him become the governor of Normandy." "Yes, sir." In a small villa on the east bank of the Seine, Paris Police Superintendent Guizot glanced at the ajar door and shouted at his mistress, who was eavesdropping outside, "Anna, close the door and make sure no servants come near." "Oh." The woman unwillingly closed the door and walked away, mumbling, "He treats me like a servant. This is my house." Only then did Guizot turn back to the short, curly-haired man in front of him. He took a hard puff from his pipe and said, "Simeon, this time the Crown Prince isn't just playing around and then returning to the Palace of Versailles. He plans to stay at the police bureau." The short man was the former Saint Antoine District Police Commissioner who had been forced to take a leave of absence for illness. He immediately said anxiously, "But the municipal commissioner told me I could have my position back in 2 months at the most." Who knew it would turn out this way? Guizot exhaled a puff of smoke. "Right now, it's not just you. The Crown Prince is a big problem for the entire police bureau." He stared at Simeon. "There's one thing now. If you can do it well, you won't just get your old position back, you might even get a promotion." A look of joy flashed in the short man's eyes. "Sir, just give me the order." "You know the Saint Antoine district best. Who are the most powerful gangs there?" "The Haas gang and the Black Sheep gang," Simeon said. "They control more than 80% of the territory in the district, and each has over 100 men." Guizot nodded, pulled out a piece of paper, and handed it to him. A look of madness flashed in his eyes.
You go find them. Whether it's dismembering bodies, rape, or kidnapping, or setting fires, anything will do. Just tell them to cause a big mess in the Saint Antoine district. It needs to be a completely out of control, total mess. Simeon's pupils shrank in shock at the mention of those words. He was silent for a moment before he nodded. Okay, a total mess. He then glanced at the paper in his hand and immediately jumped up from his chair, exclaiming in disbelief, 30,000 livres! The paper was a draft for 30,000 livres. At the time, 20,000 livres could buy a villa in Paris. 30,000 livres was absolutely a massive sum that could make any gang go crazy. That's nothing, Guizot said, motioning for him to sit down. Tell the gang members that they will get 1,000 livres for every incident they cause that creates a panic. A month from now, whoever does the best will get another 20,000 livres. Yes, sir. Simeon's hands were trembling slightly from nervousness. All right, go and do it, Guizot said, giving him another deep look. And if anything goes wrong, the big man behind me will take care of you. But remember, this was all your idea, and I have nothing to do with it. Got it?
Yes, I got it. You can count on me. Guizot stood by the window, watching Simeon's hurried departure, a cold sneer on his lips. He hadn't intended to play such a big game, but yesterday, Lefebvre told him to go ahead and do what he had to do, and that he would take care of any problems. With that, he had no more reservations. Your Royal Highness, you would have been so much better off enjoying life at the Palace of Versailles. You just had to step into this muddy water, he muttered to himself, gritting his teeth. 3 days later, the Saint Antoine District Police Station. Joseph was reading citizen complaint letters under the shade of a tree, which were, in fact, mostly praises for the police, when Inspector Magoni suddenly ran up to him, gave a bow, and said breathlessly, "Your Highness, something else has happened. 2 people were killed at a shoe store on Rue de l'Iris Blanc, and the shop was also burned down." Joseph immediately frowned. Since the day before yesterday afternoon, there had been multiple violent crimes in the Saint Antoine district. 2 people died the day before, and 3 died with 2 seriously injured yesterday. He had originally thought they were isolated incidents, but he hadn't expected another one today. What's the situation?
Arden took his men there, Magoni said. The fire has been put out, but the criminals haven't been caught yet. Joseph immediately returned to his office and began to mobilize his men to handle the case. As dusk approached, Arden returned with an update on the Rue de l'Iris Blanc case and was reporting to Joseph. Just then, another police officer came with bad news. The Black Sheep Gang, for some reason, had gone crazy and were attacking people all over Rue de l'Iris Blanc. 7 or 8 passers-by had already been injured, and they urgently needed police reinforcement. End of this chapter.